So here we go. And let me just live stream it as well to Facebook.
9. I think my family joined, that's it.
Okay. Page, there we go. Okay. Just one more minute here. Just want to get it live on Facebook as well.
So let's do some, no, it's still not gonna work. There it is. In case they don't know what they're here for.
Right. Okay.
I have something, David.
Yeah, you've got the, yeah, that's, okay, Michael's left. That was quick.
Even that.
Oh, Gina sent a note here. Hi, Gina.
There we go. Okay, there we go. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We got something special for you tonight. This is Doug Jeffers. I'm the Director of Wine Sales for Binny's. And we got 2 super VIPs for the wine world that I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. So tonight it's all about Opus One. And whether you've been able to pick up some of these bottles, we're going to be treated to the 2010, the 2012, and the 2016, the current vintage. And whether you're able to pick these up from your local Binny's, or perhaps you're a collector already and recognize an awesome opportunity to maybe open a bottle up and taste with these guys, or maybe you're looking for a really special Father's Day treat, and that's hinted toward my kids. So thank you guys for being here. This is CEO David Pearson and winemaker Michael Silacci. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
We're very happy to be here. I'm going to say 2 sentences, maybe 3, and then let Michael drive and enjoy the ride with him and chime in as we go. But I just want to thank you, Doug, and thank Benny's for having us and for putting this together. I'm struck by how quickly we all have adapted and adopted the video process, because I remember a few years ago being up in Montreal, talking with the wine organization up there. They're called SAQ, and we obviously couldn't get up there as often as we wanted, and they suggested that we arrange Michael to do a tasting of the new vintage via video, and I think Skype or something existed back then. And I remember pushing back on that really hard and saying, no, that's not what we do. We don't want to do that because we can't connect with people the same way. We can't have the same experience. And all of a sudden, with coronavirus and the quarantining, everybody has learned Zoom etiquette and become comfortable on Zoom. And I'm so happy that we're doing this. It's a great way to tell stories, and it's a great way to get the wines and the people reconnected when we can't physically. So we've been doing a few of these, not that many, but the ones we've done, we've really enjoyed and appreciated, and loved the comments that have come in through the chat and through the questions, which I think is really nice too. So I just, on behalf of Michael and Opus One, want to say thank you. And we're really happy to be here. And I'm going to let Michael take it and see where we go with this.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's an honor for us, really. And if there's any comments or questions, please use the functions on Facebook or Zoom. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both, David and Doug, for getting us started. And David and I will tag team throughout the session. You're welcome, Donna.
Yes, we see you, Donna, right?
So anyway, we're here to, Doug, do you want us to give us would you like us to give a quick background on Opus, or just talk about current events at Opus?
Absolutely. A real brief history would be terrific.
Okay, I'll let David do the brief history, and I will do the current events.
I got it. Well, I get the easy job, because the history is actually, it's a lovely history, but it's a pretty easy history and a pretty simple story to tell. Opus One is about how 2 men, Robert Mondavi and Baron Philippe de Rothschild, came together and created the concept, the idea of this one wine. And The details in terms of each gentleman's personality and character and history are quite long and quite lengthy, and I could take the rest of the afternoon and into the night telling you about both Robert Mondavi and Baron Fleet Rothschild, and I wish I could in some other time because it is fascinating and worth the time. But let's just say that Baron Fleet Rothschild, who was very visionary and a great man of the world of wine, was spending time in the 60s in Santa Barbara and had tasted some California wine and some Napa wine and recognized that something in the 60s was going on with the quality and emergence of this region. And he asked his associates who he should speak to understand the revolution that was going on in Napa. And they told him that he had to meet this guy named Robert Mondavi. Robert is the son of an Italian immigrant. His family had owned Charles Krug Winery, and Robert split from the family. It's a dramatic story that I'm again not going to go into the details, but split from the family and started his own winery in 1966. Eponymous winery, Robert Mondavi. And the thing about Robert's winery in 66, and the reason he became, I think, the natural spokesperson and leader of Napa Valley, two things I'll cite. When he built his winery, it was the first new winery in Napa since the repeal of Prohibition. And so it was something new in the valley. And he built it where the winery, it's still exactly the same way when you go visit. If you go under the arches, on the north side is the winery and the barrels and all of that, which is so fun to see. But in 66, he built another wing to the south side, which he called the vineyard room. And in that room, he imagined that people would come to try the wines, to come have meals, come see art, come hear music. And he envisioned this as what would happen there and in Napa Valley. But in 66, nobody was coming to Napa. There was nobody coming. He literally is the I will build it and they will come guy. And again, the details, he had a hard time getting started. There weren't people coming to the valley. One little anecdote, Michael Mondavi, his oldest son, in these early days, would drive his truck very slowly up the one highway. It's not really much of a highway, but it's called the Highway 29 up Napa Valley, very slowly to back traffic behind him, back traffic up behind him. And he would stop right before the Robert Mondavi winery and try and get people to go in because nobody thought that would happen. Anyway, so this is going on. Robert is trying to bring people to Napa. His family is trying. And when Robert went around the country to sell his wine, he did not travel around the country and say, here's my wine, here's the price, do you want to buy it? He shared with us the historical value, the cultural value, what he called the gracious way of living, the role that wine could and should play in our everyday lives. And he did it in a manner that when you heard him say it, you immediately wanted to live that lifestyle. He said, I want to do that. And he understood why wine mattered. And he shared it with, he was like the Julia Child for us in the wine world. Right. He opened those doors. And then he explained why Napa Valley would one day be known and recognized as a great vineyard and great winemaking region of the world. He explained the beauty of it, location, and how it worked in the entire valley. And lastly, he would say, oh, by the way, I make a wine there too. It was a very soft sell that brought people into the reason the wine mattered and to the beauty of Napa. And that made him the natural spokesperson. So our story is that Robert, the Baron, asked who he had to speak to. They said, you've got to meet this guy, Robert. They had a real meeting of mission and passion around wine. From their first meeting in 1970, it took 8 years for different reasons for both families to be ready to consider doing something. In 1978, the Baron invited Robert to fly over to Chateau Rothschild. The two men spent not more than 1.5 hours together. Image-wise, it's true, they were meeting in the Baron's bedroom. It was 9 in the morning, and Robert was invited into the Baron's bedroom, and sometimes we make jokes about this, and usually we don't. And I can't tell who's out there, so I won't make any jokes. But the Baron was 76 years old and doing there you go, thank you, Mike. Maybe we'll do some jokes later. He was 76 years old, and he did say once in an interview that there's practically nothing you can't do in the bed. That's a joke for later too. But he really did say that. I'm gonna get censored here, right? I know, we're going to dark places. Anyway, he was in his bedroom. Robert was invited in. The two men were in there for 1.5 hours, and that's where the magic of Opus One was created, because they were in effect creating a joint venture, a merger. And in most mergers, the two parties are expansive. Think of all the things we can do. Think where this can lead and what we can build and go to, and that's all fine. But these two men did the exact opposite. They were incredibly focused, and the power and the genius of Opus is in its focus. They said to each other that they would make one single red wine, and that they imagined, of course, that this wine would be as high quality as could be. Their idea was that this wine would reflect the personality and character of Baron Philippe de Rothschild, Chateau Mouton Rothschild wines, and the personality and character of Robert Mondavi wines. And these two families, these two personalities and styles would be so seamlessly blended together as to create one unique wine. So they imagined giving birth to a grand vin, a great wine of the world, that would reflect the best of both cultures fused into one. And that's the single idea that they had. And I believe that today, 41 years later, 2 years now, 42 years later, since 78, the success, much of the success at Opus One that we're enjoying comes from the fact that we're still doing the exact same thing those two men said that morning in Pauillac, which is putting all of our passion and our energy and our resources into every year expressing one wine, which is the epitome of that year, we're going to merge right into Michael here, into expressing that year and create a unique expression by the origin of each family and the cultures that go into it. And the last thing I'm going to say, because that's all Opus One is, and I believe again so much that the strength and beauty of Opus One is that we stayed true to this objective. We never present Opus One, we're certainly not going to do it today, as having realized the dream of those two men, like, ta-da, here it is, it's all done. It's not like we've achieved that dream. To the contrary, the dream of giving birth to a great wine can only be realized across generations. It's not 50 years or 75 years, it's hundreds and more. What makes Mouton and Margaux and Lafite and Haut-Brion great wines is not the soil or the barrels or the pretty chateau, it's the fact that they've done it for 200 years. Mm-hmm. And so our sense is we're still learning how to do this, how to grow the grapes. And that's the passion that Michael can share with you. We're still learning how to find this wine. And the good news is the wines we're making today aren't too bad at all. But the fun is that we're going to create a wine that we believe we're a small part in the early phases of what should be one of the world's great wines. And sharing that passion with people is what's so fun about doing these tastings.
True pedigree. It's a great story. Yeah. Yeah,
it's a great story. There's a lot of color to it that I kept out, and not just in the bedroom too, outside the bedroom. So that's where we're at. So today we're going to share 3 vintages that Michael made. Let me one more. I'm sorry. There's one more image that I share all the time, and I think Michael's okay with it. He'll maybe he won't tell me. I think one way to understand Opus One is we are in effect a child of these two families. And the metaphor is perfect because the child looks a little bit like both parents, but is clearly independent and unique, right? I've got the eyes of my dad and the ears of my mom or something. Sure. And that's what Opus wants to be. You want to look a little bit like both parents. And when the child is young, the parents do everything for the child because they have to. And through the years, the child learns the lessons, the values, the styles, everything from the parents. But the time always comes where we, to keep growing, to keep living, need to move out of the house and live on our own. We've learned the lesson from the parents, and the added lessons from your mother saying, put your jacket on, or your father saying, you haven't done this, loses its value. It's exactly what happened with Opus One at the turn of the century, where from the early part of all of the early history of Opus One, there were 2 winemakers, always one from Robert Mondavi. It was Robert's younger son, Tim, and always a winemaker from Mouton. And they would come together and make all the decisions for making Opus One. And there were 2 directors, one from each family. Had there not been 2 directors, Opus One would not be bicultural. The California side would have absorbed it, not in an not unintentional way, it would have been just happened by proximity. But because there were 2 directors, one from France who was always defending the French idea, and one from California, the Mondavi idea, and they fought a lot, that created the genetics that makes Opus One truly French and Californian and impossible to pull apart. But at the end of the century, turn of the century, the 2 winemakers and the 2 directors had fulfilled that structural mission, and they were not adding as much creative content and innovation as was needed, because you have to always keep innovating and driving and growing. And the families, Mondavis and Rothschilds, were far-sighted enough and understood this well enough that they knew they had to cut the cords with Opus. So they decided to get one single winemaker and brought Michael on board in 2000. 2001 was his first full vintage where he was making the decisions. And he's been making the wine ever since. Today's wines you're going to taste, or we're going to taste and you're going to watch, are all his. And I had the enormous honor of coming on board in 2004 as the first single CEO, and was given the mission to manage Opus One along with Michael and the staff, everybody else, independently of the owners. And so for the last 16 years, I'm biased about this, but I think we've made more change, more innovation, more growth than in the first 25. I'm not sure my math adds up right, but it's supposed to add up to 40. And it's an exciting time, and it's like being in your mid-20s, living on your own for the first time, and those are good years. So that's it. That's Opus today. We're a young kid out on our own for the first time, feeling our legs and making some good wines and enjoying the course, the journey, I should say. Now I'm done. Michael?
So, yeah, I guess we do resemble Mr. Mondavi and Baron Philippe in a lot of ways, culturally, emotionally, spiritually. I don't know if we're fortunate or not, but none of us got hit their noses. So, that's, we're good there. Yeah. And anyway, but David was talking about time and place. To me, there's basically three types of wines that are made, red wines, actually just wines. The first is wines that reflect time and place, meaning that each vintage should have an expression of the season. In a warm season, you're going to see maybe a little bit more ripe fruit. In a cool season, maybe more herbal notes and fresh fruit notes. But you should always be able to have some idea of what the season was like when you smell and
I'll be right back.
When you smell and taste the wine. And then in the mouthfeel, the place comes through. So that's to me, the common thread across vintages is place. And so wines that reflect time and place, to me, are classic wines. The second style of wine is one that expresses the personality of the owner or the winemaker. And those can be the ones that are a little bit more expressive, dense, fruit forward, lots of oak, maybe intense flavors, and maybe a little higher alcohol. They're beautiful wines on their own, and they express a personality, and they may not be reflective of the appellation or the place or the vineyard, but that's okay. It's a different style of winemaking. And the third would be a house style, where someone's a winery's trying to make, the winemaker's trying to make the same style of wine year in and year out. So you tell, oh, that's the style, and you pick out the name of the winery because it's pretty consistent from year to year. We want to fall on the classic side because we feel that in order to tell the story that Mr. Mondavi and Baron Philippe started, you have to let people in on where we are coming from. And there was a question, actually I'll answer right now, from Chris, because it continues with history, and it was about extended maceration. The first couple of vintages, the length of time so extended maceration or skin contact is the amount of time juice or wine stay in contact with the skins from the first day of harvest to the day you drain and press, separate the wine from the skins. And the first couple years, it was 10 days total. So there would be the fermentation, which lasts between 7 and 10 days, and then they would separate the wine from the skins. That was what they were doing at Mondavi and what they were doing in Napa during that time period. Also, the barrel age was up to 24 months that first year. And then Lucy and Cieno they were wondering, well, actually it was some funny stories about that. Some of the winemakers or the enologists at Mondavi were excited because he was taking a lot of press wine to backblend. And they were saying, oh, right, he's leaving the free run to us. He's using a lot of this press wine. And then he explained to them that the length of time in the skins was too short, and that they had given up, allowed a lot of good characteristics that were coming from the skins to be lost into the press wine. And that's why it was important to backblend the press wine, incorporate that. And then there was, so it evolved over time where the length of the number of months in barrel dropped down to around 18. And skin contact reached a maximum in the year before I arrived in 2000 at 44 days. When I came, I wanted to go in and really severely prune everything, kind of not start over, but hit the reset button. And so we did severe pruning, and we approached irrigation and the way we worked with the vines very differently. We wanted a deeper expression of place, so we did longer irrigations, but infrequently, to get the roots to go down into the lower horizon to give us a more complete expression of place. And even in the way we were picking, we were looking for, when I first came, I interviewed from June of 2000 until January of June of 2000 until January of 2001. And Gina just noted that today is Mr. Mondavi's birthday. So
That's
happy
great.
birthday. And so they asked, well, I remember Peter Ventura and George Shepler asked me, Peter in particular, make a change. We want you to make a change. That's why you're here, but not too big of a change. And so what I felt the wine needed was a little bit more concentration in the middle of the wine and a longer finish. So extend the finish and increase the concentration. That was my goal. And so we started to taste berries and make harvest decisions in the vineyard. And we were trying to draw a very fine line between how can we express the time, retaining the acidity, because the acidity is so important for a wine to be able to age and also to balance the tannins. So how could we maintain the acidity? And that would naturally drive us into making wines that had more fresh fruit and some ripe fruit, so you could get a sense of place. The team's evolved over time, and we have an amazing group, very tight-knit, in the cellar and in the winery. And I'm not going to say too much more right now because I think we should probably taste the 2010. I'll see in the chat if there's no other questions there, so we're good. So we'll start with the 2010. Now this was a vintage that was the most challenging vintage ever for me. It was cool and wet during the springtime. So we usually leave at first hedging 16 to 18 leaves. I wanted to leave more leaves on each shoot. So we'd have those leaves there to pull up the water through the soil, to dry out the soils well before we got to veraison. And we had a little heat spell forecasted for the end of June. And the question was, do we give the vine some water, or do we remove some more of the leaves? Do we reduce the demand, or we give a little bit more supply? Because with gravity and active root growth near the surface in the first 3 feet of the soil, that first 3 feet or first horizon were drier. And I wanted to leave the leaves on the vine, on the shoots, to pull up soil from the lower horizons, because I knew there was forecasted July and August would be cool. So then after that, we gave the vines a little bit of water. And then progressively during July, we would hedge and remove some of the leaves. And we get to the first part of August, and Natalie Jouret, who's our director of viticulture, actually her name now is, you go from Natalie Jouret to Natalie Buckland. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But she said most people in the valley have been stripping leaves in the cluster zone because they want, it's been cool, there's high pressure for mildew and botrytis, and they want airflow and sun exposure to keep them dry and protect the berries from mildew and botrytis. Can we do that? And I said, absolutely not. I have this gut feeling that I have a sense that we're going to have a heat spell this year. And so I don't want you to remove the leaves because you're there with your team to protect the vines, the grapes from mildew, and the leaves are there. If this is a cluster, my fist, and this is a leaf, the leaf is there to protect the grapes from sunburn. So you do your job and let the cluster and let the leaves do theirs. And I went to David and told him that he's like, sometimes when I go to see David, it's like, I was raised Catholic, so it's like going to see the priest and confessing. And so I told David I had this.
I'm not sure I like that comparison, but keep going.
You are a high priest in certain ways, but do you remember the conversation?
Oh, very well.
And what was it?
Well, and Michael, your technical explanation is brilliant and of course to the point, but in a bigger sense, the conventional practice is to do exactly what you propose not doing. And in cold, wet years, to increase maturity, everybody goes out and pulls leaves and drops fruit. And you pull leaf to let more sun in, you drop fruit so that the vine can get what it's got on it right. It's a conservative insurance practice that everybody in the valley was doing. Michael came into my office and said, as he said moments ago, that he had a feeling that it would get warm. He said, I can't tell you why. There was no science. There was no data to back it up. But he thought it would get warm. Therefore, he didn't want to do what everybody else was doing, which is to pull leaf and drop fruit. And when I tell this story, and I tell it a lot in my own way, I tell people I checked first to see if Michael was drunk or if he'd been abusing any sort of substance, which he wasn't. And it becomes an interesting moment of winery management as a team, because if he had been wrong and there was not the heat at the end of the year and he'd left too much fruit on the vine and didn't pull leaves, we could have had unripe fruit or less ripe fruit. And if he's right, then we win. And so it's a gamble. And the French call winemakers gamblers anyway. And the point that I was going to make, wasn't going to jump in this quickly, but I'll make this point now anyway. I love what winemaking has today, which is a balance of art and science, which is infused by intuition. And the only way that you can get intuition is through experience. You can't read it in a book. Today's winemakers, in most cases, it's a cool thing because you can make wine in the Northern Hemisphere, then fly to the Southern Hemisphere, then fly to Australia and come back and do it again. By doing that, you get more fermentations in your lifetime, but you never spend a lifetime in any one place. And one of our Opus One's greatest benefits, having a winemaker like Michael, is that he's been here now for almost 20 vintages, and he's starting to get intuition. And my sense is that the 2010 year was where he used science and art, but his intuition told him that this was the right thing to do. And it was so I went along with, I went along with it. Said, let's do that. And he was right in spades. Back to you, Michael.
25th of August, we had a really severe heat spell. It just kind of, the temperatures cooled down just a touch, and then we had a second wave of heat the following week. And it worked out for us. And then what happened was we had tested an optical sorter in 2009 and purchased ours in 2010. And our facility manager asked if he said, we had projected that harvest would start around the 5th or 6th of October. And here we are, the middle of September, and he asked me, could you find 1 ton of grapes that we could run through this optical sorter so we can test it and make sure it works and calibrate it? I said, yeah, I'm sure we can find a ton. It's 3 weeks early, but I'm sure we can find something. So Natalie and I went out and we found 20 tons. And I said, how could this be? And I asked her for, could you send me a summary of the weather data? And we saw that the temperatures, the average temperatures throughout the summer, even though it was cooler until the heat, they were right in the zone of maximum photosynthesis. So the vines never took a nap during the day. They just kept making photosynthetates, ripening the fruit and growing, etc. And so there was a nice moderate, continual ripening pattern, maturation. And that's why the fruit was ready early. So there was going to be, I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday, And it was forecast that there would be a heat spell the following Monday. So Natalie and I went out and walked every single block, and we put each block into one of three categories. The fruit is ready to be picked. The fruit is not ready to be picked, and the vines need water to get through the heat spell. And the third was the vines didn't need water, or did need water, whatever. I just said the opposite, and it wasn't ready to be picked. So we went out and we picked the fruit over that weekend. We started and worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we ended up bringing 18% of the entire vintage in the first weekend, and then just waited another 5 days or so before we resumed harvest. I thought it was pretty impressive. We learned so much from that. I mean, it's dumb luck. Facility manager comes and asks me for a ton of grapes, and we changed the whole way we look at harvest and maturation. And since then, we've gone in early, as early as we can. Like Paul Revere, we're waiting to see the whites of the eyes of the invaders. We're waiting to see the purple of ripeness. And we now pick very early, and you take these lessons wherever you can get them, but you take them.
So Michael, I have thought and told people, whether it's right or not, that the work that you've done in the vineyards through the years, the change in irrigation, which you mentioned earlier, some of the pruning and the timing work that you've done on the vineyards has allowed the grapes to ripen faster than before, which supports the earlier picking. I mean, nobody wants unripe pyrazines and bell peppers.
Yeah.
So it's the trick is, if you've got unripe tannins and bell peppers and pyrazines, you don't want to pick early. But the beauty is our vineyards have been giving us ripe, fresh fruit early. And I think it's because of the work. It's not just a decision to pick earlier.
Exactly. Moving from getting some water on the vines if they need water at veraison at bloom, and holding off water until veraison. So we force the vines out of the vegetative growth cycle and into the phenolic or ripening cycle earlier. So you do shave off a few days. Actually, you end up giving them a few more days of maturing the fruit. But
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, David.
I was going to start talking about the sensory quality of the 10, and it's evolved, of course, since it was first released 3 years after harvest and going forward. But when it came out of the gates, what I loved about the wine is the way that it expressed uniquely the year that Michael just described to you all, in the sense that in the nose, in the aroma, it was a little bit more spicy than naturally more than some of our sunnier, warmer years throughout the full growing season. And it had this very attractive herbe de Provence herbal note to it, which was unique to that year. But in the mouth, it had this ripe fruit of plums and cherries that came from the heat at the end of the year. And the duality of the wine always makes me think of the duality of the growing season, which is what you want a wine to do. And I love that for that reason.
Is it typical in a typical season that the temperatures will get high enough that it will shut down that photosynthesis, or is it? And the 2010, Chris P is asking on here, was it more challenging than 2011?
To answer your question, yes. As the temperatures get to up close to 95 degrees, the vines will then start to shut down, where they can't take up enough water through the soil, nor can they get enough they'll steal water from the grape berries, and then the berries rehydrate overnight. So they will just shut down. They'll close the stomata and they take a nap. We have so many things in common as humans with grapevines. We're about 80% water, and we take naps when it gets really hot. And
I take naps all the time.
I'm sorry?
I take naps all the time.
Yes. I have a mat under my desk, although now I no longer have a shade. But we also have hammocks along the river. So I take a 20-minute nap every day during harvest along the river. But to answer Chris' question, 11 was not as challenging to me as 10 because of 10. I felt very comfortable with 11. And my first year in 2001, we actually picked some fruit early. And we were getting a green, grassy bell pepper character when we were tasting the wines to decide when to take them off the skins. And that concerned me a little bit, but that kind of melted away and it became an herbal note. In 11, when you walked into the lab, when we had all the glasses there, we were going through making decisions for drain and press. It smelled like somebody just mowed a lawn. But we were confident. Now, I would not let anyone else from outside the winemaking team come in and smell, because it would just create anxiety. But eventually, that it went away. We got some black currant bud character, and then it evolved into an herbal note. And I love the 11. The 11, funny enough, the vintages all have about the same acidity and the same pH. 11's no different, but the perception of acidity in 11 is so much different. It seems like it's much more acidic, but it's not. It's just your perception. It's because of all the other things that are balancing it. And I learned this at Beaulieu. You can have textbook perfect numbers. Doesn't mean that the fruit is ready to be picked, or that you should or should not do something to the wine based on those numbers. You always have to take into account what your assessment is and what you think you need to be doing. And there was a question about
blending. How do we do blending?
Blending, okay. So blending is, first of all, there's several components to blending. The first is we have 4 estate vineyards, and within each estate vineyard we have 9 or so blocks, sub-blocks. So we can cross blend fruit from different blocks, because one block is not uniformly ripe at the same time. So there are pockets of ripeness, and we'll pick from those pockets of ripe fruit and blend those in the tank. There's also 5 different Bordeaux varieties. Now, we will blend Cabernet from different blocks. We do not blend Merlot with any other varieties. We don't blend Cabernet Franc with any other varieties, but we do blend Petit Verdot and Malbec with other varieties, mostly Cabernet Sauvignon. So this is in 2007 when we started to co-ferment Petit Verdot with Cabernet Sauvignon. That was because Cabernet, even though it's 80% of our vineyard planting, it had low fruitfulness, so fewer flowers became grape berries in 2007. But Petit Verdot is always has a lot of fruit, bears a lot of fruit. Sometimes, we have an average of about 2 clusters per shoot for Cabernet. It can be 3 or 4 clusters per shoot in Petit Verdot. I told you earlier I was raised Catholic, and so I had this notion, or this idea, that if grape varieties were religious, Petit Verdot would be Roman Catholic, because it seems to feel guilty about the amount of water it has. You measure the water stress of the plant, and it's like, I'm not worthy of all this water. So it has that going for it. Plus, it has an abundance of fruit. 4 clusters a shoot. I mean, that's abundance. So it has issues. And so we, and when we would try to blend it as Petit Verdot and Cabernet Sauvignon as wine, there would be a limit to how much we could actually blend, because the Petit Verdot would make the blend rustic. But when we started to co-ferment the fruit, put in the same tank, Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot, it was a beautiful harmony right off the bat. And that's what we've been doing ever since. And then also then we started in 2013, we blended clones, 4 different clones randomly planted in a 10-acre block to create biodiversity, but also to create to stretch out the nuances and the differences and the concentration on the palate by having different clones that ripen slightly at different times. And the final blend, which may be the most important aspect of blending, is blending people, getting the right team together. having people who have opposing viewpoints, who see things differently, and you work together as a team, not missing, you know, each person covers the blind spots of the next person and making great decisions. So we have all these samples or lots on the counter in the lab. They're not labeled. We don't know what they are. We just start blending by evaluating each one individually, and then looking at rankings. You know, how close to the number one. If everyone gives the wine a 1, then that's the top one.
So Michael, just color, just for 2 seconds, just for dimension for people, because you didn't say it. Every year Michael is making one wine, but when those tastings occur, there are between 50 to 60 unique wine lots that are being blended back together. I just wanted to give the dimension scale to it. Keep going.
Thank you.
Is the varietal blend much different from the 10 to the 12? Because I'm smelling them together and they're both very compelling, but in different ways.
So 10, I'll give you, I happen to have it in front of me. 10 is 84% Cabernet Sauvignon. 12 is 79%. 5.5% Cabernet Franc and Merlot, 5.5% in 10. And it's 7% and 6% in 2012. And then the Petit Verdot is 4% in 10 and 6% in 12. And Malbec is 1% in 10 and 2% in 12. So there's a slight.
Okay.
There's a specific thing that Donna asked, and then the question, and I want to speak to both and then let Michael take it back over. She asked if there's a minimum percentage of Cabernet, and the answer is no, because 1, we don't label Opus One as a Cabernet Sauvignon, and 2, because Michael's not blending to percentages, he's blending to feelings and flavors and a blend. So the percentage comes out, he does the blend, the group does the blend, and then he checks to see what the percentages are versus shooting for percentages. And the second one I'm going to give a little answer to, and then Michael can speak to much more at length. It's a great question, is how do you enable the expression of time and place while at the same time remaining true to the voice of Opus One? I'll let Michael say how he does this, but when I try to do a vertical tasting like this and try to talk to people to have them an image, again, I'm a simplistic anthropomorphizing human image. When we look at a family with multiple kids, 5 or 6 kids, say there's no twins in there, and you line them up on a wall, each kid clearly is unique in expression, but there's something that makes those kids part of that family that clearly aren't part of that family, whatever it is. And that's the voice of Opus One, that when we do a vertical, the thing that links these together, quite sure Michael will agree, is the mouthfeel and the structure, and particularly the quality of the tannins that Michael preserves that mostly comes out of the vineyard, but he preserves. It's a silky mouthfeel, and he protects that so that every Opus One has that thing. That's the Opus voice. And then around that, he'll let the wine speak for the ear.
That's a good analogy. And often people ask me, which is your favorite vintage? And my favorite vintage is, imagine you have 3 children and you take them to a Japanese restaurant. It's when they're young. The child that behaves the best that night is your favorite. And it could be different the next night at an Italian restaurant, whoever's not throwing meatballs at other people. So, you know, there is no favorite. Actually, I do have a favorite, but
Gina Voce knows the favorite vintage is the one she's selling.
That's right.
That's the old sales line.
My favorite though is 10, and that's because of how challenging it was. It was like being in an Aikido match with Mother Nature and taking what she was giving us, her energy, and channeling it into something positive. So it was, at first I thought, and David called me on this, he said, is it just because it was so challenging, or is it really the best? Because when wine writers were first writing about 2010, they were knocking it. They were saying they didn't think it would be a good vintage. Over time, though, they've acknowledged that it is a very good vintage. Steve Tanzer just did a retrospective tasting on the 10s, and he just was glowing about the 2010s coming from Napa Valley. So,
and I'll fess up publicly to the 22 of us. there was a moment where Michael and I were looking at the 10 before it had been released, and I don't remember the exact words, but Michael did suggest to me that he considered it to be one of the best wines he'd made or Opus had made. And I remember saying, you can't say that, that's not realistic. It's just not the quality of the vintage. It was not an exceptional vintage. And it's now one of my favorites as well because of the trials and because of the intuition and because of the output of the product. It's an exceptional wine, as wine should be.
It's a great story for the 10. I agree. And the evolution in the glass right in front of me is incredible too. Just all three of them.
And it's interesting because David and I have tended to like vintages, the same vintages. In 2006, we both latched onto. 2006, we did not egg white fine, so it was a little rough around the edges. I thought, oh, it'd be fine. It will resolve itself in the bottle in 14 months. It didn't quite do that by the time it was released, but it did eventually. 2008 was another one. It was a year where we had frost, Pinot Noir level yields of 1.8 tons an acre. Mr. Mondavi passed away that year, so 10 years ago. There are other things that happened that year, but that also was a vintage we liked very much. So 10, I love the mouthfeel of this wine. It's dense. It's like one of those millefeuille, those cakes with many layers that are distinctive when you first look at it, but then they kind of blend over time. They blend into each other, so there's less of a looking, oh, there's that and then that. They just kind of, one thing evolves into the next. And I like the dark fruit component of this wine, the forest floor. There's a nice earthy tone, and the acidity is glowing. It's not necessarily vibrant, but it's glowing. It's present, holding it together, and pretty good finish, pretty lengthy finish. So let's see. Should we see if there are any questions?
It looked like it.
Speaking of blending, is Opus now largely free-run juice, or is there still a little press wine? Is Overture a barrel selection, or, and then the question ends. I know what they're going to say. No, Opus One is free-run and press wine. What I didn't finish saying was my first year, because of the things we did in the vineyard, we dropped to 32 days average skin contact time and held that for 3 vintages. Now, when I say it was 32 days for 3 years, and it was, that doesn't mean we did the math. Oh my gosh, now we got to take this off so we hit 32 days. It's an average across, something that was 35 days and some that was 19 days. And it just so happened that those first 3 years that I was here, it was 32 days. Then it dropped to 29 and then 25. And now we're anywhere between 17 days and 21 days skin contact. So it's ended up being less because of the way that we are working in the vineyard, picking, tasting for harvest decisions, etc. So there is definitely press wine that goes into it. Almost every lot of light and medium press is blended back in with the free run immediately. Some of the heavy press goes in. Heavy press wine may be 1.5% of the total, but in 2009, a full 50% of all of the heavy press was back blended because it was so exceptional. But again, it's all based on mouthfeel.
So Donna asked another good follow-up question on the maintaining the link, maintain the connection with the Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Mondavi, because it's both. Proximity doesn't matter, but I'm sure you meant that. Ensure that the kids remain in the image of their parents, given that there's no longer a shared process. There's 2 answers. One is it's in our genes. It's literally fused into us, and the metaphor works. when you move out of the house, you don't stop being your parents' kids. You evolve in a path that had been set up by the experience you had with your parents. If it's a positive experience and you've absorbed and agree with the values and the personalities and the traits, then you continue down that path. It would be hard to go otherwise. That said, Michael has lots of consultations, two a year, with the Rothschild winemaking team and the Mondavi team, where it's not a directive meeting, it's a consultation. And it's a chance for us to check the waters, check each other, and they learn from Michael as much as Michael learns from them. And that has been a very fruitful way to make sure that we're still in sync and in phase with our parents.
And if you are, if we are, as I said earlier, trying to make wines that express time and place, we're naturally going to fall into something that Baron Philippe or Mr. Mondavi would be proud of. I know that I was at my cousin's house in Switzerland on vacation a few years ago, and I was doing an interview with winesearcher.com, and one of the questions was, so, you know, with the wine writers now that are so popular and impactful, which one do you make wine for? And I said, I make wine for two people. Neither of them are in this world anymore. It's Mr. Mondavi and Baron Philippe de Rothschild. I'm making wine for them because they had a vision and we're implementing that vision. So 2000,
and this 16 is incredible as well.
Well, we got to go to the 12 first, right?
I think, did we talk about 12?
no,
All right, we have to.
we've gone on, yeah, David, we'll speed up a little bit. Sorry, Doug.
That's quite all right.
There was a question about ageability, and so all of these wines are aged in 100% new French oak, but the suppliers are team members too. And so the suppliers I tell them, I want you to make our barrels with French oak from French forests, and they have to be tight grained, and they taste with this every year. So I ask them to make a barrel that is like a pedestal upon which we put the wine. I don't want the barrel masking or overpowering the wine. It has to be in harmony and in balance with the wine. And if we're able to, when you're able to age wine in 100% new French oak, that means you have to have some substance that has come from the vineyard. And looking at for balance every step of the way, from the way we plant the vines until the way we make the wine. If you're doing that, you're going to make a wine that is accessible upon release, perhaps a little too early to drink, but you can still enjoy it. If you have a glass of champagne with appetizers and then a nice white wine with fish, by the time you and the red wine are ready to get together, you've both been marinated a little bit and aerated, so you're ready for each other. So even though it's a young wine, you can be ready for it. And the wine should age, and the reason I feel these wines will age well is because of that balance, but also because of the acidity. So.
I want to jump in and differ slightly with Michael, only slightly, of course. I think that one of the inherent traits of Opus One is, as I said earlier, these silky tannins. And it's surprising because the silky tannins makes the wine eminently drinkable when it's young. We make wines that want to be pleasant and enjoyable all the time, and it's not a marketing spin or a sales spin. They come out with soft, silky tannins, but the tannins are still there, which are necessary to allow for aging. And so it's surprising because a lot of people think that wines that are going to age a long time have to have strong, present tannins. And it's not true. And so our wines, by our history, 40 years of looking at how the wines age, there's a kind of pattern you can see. If the wines are drinkable when they're young, for the first 10 years, they go through early ages of fruit and barrel characters, and then they go through a phase where they shut down and are very quiet. And then they open back up at around 15 years. It varies depending on the vintage. And they start to express bottle bouquet, these tertiary aromas that come from the aging that goes on in the bottle It smells like wet forest floor, incense or black tea, old furniture, some leather notes. And at about 15 years, this is my answer to Donna's question, about 15 to maybe 20 years is where Opus One has a kind of, has a moment, it's a kind of peak, where it has not only useful fruit and oak elements, but they're added in with bottle bouquet. And if you keep going to 20, 25 years or 30 years, which our wines can do properly stored, of course, the fruit continues to diminish, but then this bottle bouquet takes over. And you have this very beautiful, soft, elegant wine with great complexity. Both Michael and I love the 87 and the 80 when we get to try it.
Yeah.
So Donna, the answer is they're good young, but try between 15 and 20-year-old if you can get the wines there.
So quickly, because I know that we're going a little long. 2012 to me was a BBV, big beautiful vintage. We were a little frightened because there wasn't much rain at all during that winter, and then in February, January, February, just before bud break, we got about 12 inches, which was enough for the entire to get the vines through to harvest, and there was a bountiful harvest. So it was one that we had the two Q's, quality and quantity, coming through. And this one, I mean, again, I love the dark fruit and the earthiness of this wine, and beautiful long finish again. And that year we were actually draining and pressing as early as 15 days after harvest. So we were getting a lot out of the skins very quickly. Moving on to 16, this was the 5th consecutive year of a drought, but this vintage was, it was a drought, but I think it's funny to say that we got 28 inches right at the end of 15 and into 16. So we had a good bud break. It was an early bud break. Petit Verdot came out on March 7th, and then it got cool and there was some rain, and then nothing else broke bud again for another week. And there was some, an inch of rain or so in April, which was perfectly timed. We start cultivating, working the soil in January if we can get into the soil, because we want to, because the soils here are a sandy clay loam with gravel, and the clay will dry the soil rather quickly. So you need to, you have a narrow window during which you can actually cultivate the soil and get it to a good spot. And then it will get dry and kind of hard, relatively hard. And then we wait for a spring rain to moisten it again, and then we can finish the cultivation. But 16 was just a beautiful vintage. Both 12 and 16 were just beautiful vintages. You had to be paying attention. You couldn't like take your eye off the ball and think, well, it's going to make itself, or just get into a sense of leisure. You had to stay focused on it and not miss any opportunity. Anybody could make a great wine in the conditions of 12 or 16, but you can only make a great wine if you're paying attention in a year like that. So, but yeah, 16. Doug, you were starting to talk about 16?
Yeah, I was wondering about 16. Actually, in the any insights on the 17? Waiting for that will be your next release.
Yeah, 17, we've been tasting quite a bit recently. It's, again, the mouthfeel. Now that was a year where we had a lot of heat spells during the growing season. But the vines really did well. You know, we would do proactive irrigations. We always irrigate when we see a heat spell coming. Or if it's forecasted, we will give water to the vines 3 to 4 days before the forecasted heat spell. That's the only way, because it takes that amount of time for the water to get into the vine to protect it. It does you no good to be giving water to the vines during a heat spell, because a lot of it evaporates and it doesn't even get to the vine until later. But I think the mouthfeel, there's such a silky, creamy edge right now to the 17 that's really impressive. But I think it's going to be another, you know, we've been really lucky in Napa for a number of years. 3 was a little bit challenging. 11 was challenging, 10 was challenging, but we've been pretty fortunate. And 17 is another one that's come through.
It's great. Looking forward to the 17. There's a question from Chris P. again here. What is your, for each of you, what is your all-time favorite food pairing for Opus?
Michael goes first.
I like, did you tell me to go first, David?
I offered that up to you, yes.
Okay.
But I can take your answer that way.
I like, boy, there's a lot of different foods I like. I like some sushis with Opus, especially salmon, I'm sorry, tuna, the fatty tuna and the oro. And I also love oxtails and polenta with it. And then nothing, I wouldn't turn away from a cowboy ribeye, medium rare.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, my answer is, I'm thinking a little bit like the 2010 vintage, its uniqueness. The food and wine pairing that jumps in my mind is one that occurred while I was traveling in Tokyo in Japan a number of years ago. One of our good friends, we were in his house and he'd had his chef prepare us a lunch, and we were having the 2001 vintage. It probably would have been in 2007 or 8 that this happened. That was fine. It was from his cellar, and the 2001 and Michael's first vintage. And it suddenly dawned on me that we were having this wine with white fish and a cream sauce, and it was working beautifully. And I stopped and wait a second. We're having a Napa Cab with white fish and a cream sauce with a little bit of herb spicing in it, and it sung. It was gorgeous. Part of it was the location, part of it was the moment. But the 2001 has always been a thoroughbred in terms of that same silkiness. And so in a sense, the moment and that memory makes that one of my favorite pairings, although it would be crazy for me to say that my favorite pairing is white fish and cream sauce with Opus. But there's that story. And I do think that pairing is good gracious. I mean, Michael had to say steak, and I would have said ribeye steak too, good cowboy cut. But please not do, I mean, steak is great. I love steak. But in that range of hearty foods in winter, and Michael's heard me say this too, a really good cassoulet with a 2008, one of the richer, denser, 2006 right now, is a good time.
Yeah, speaking of cassoulets, my favorite restaurant cassoulet is in Castelnaudary at Los Toulettes. But the private home cassoulet that's my favorite is the one at Chez Pearson. David Pearson makes an incredible cassoulet.
All 21 of you are invited.
And one other dish I think that's very good with Opus is mushroom risotto.
With the slightly older vintages, when it picks up some of that earthiness.
Yes, yes.
Nice. Many more friends on Facebook, David, you're going to have to invite as well.
All right. Well, right. Just call ahead, please.
He has a big yard.
A big yard. Michael's right. It's not a spoiler line. Every January, I take a recipe that takes about 3 days to prepare, because real cassoulet does that. And Michael's reference of Cassoulet in France, southwest part of France, is where cassoulet is said to have been created and comes from. And yeah, a lot of love and passion goes into making some really good cassoulet.
Gina made a comment, for those who love traditional steak and Opus pairing, I found that the younger vintages pair well with the marbled, higher fat cuts like ribeye or Wagyu. And I edited that. And aged vintages pair better with filet mignon. Mushrooms, yes.
Nice.
Here, here.
And Ed's tomato sauce.
Gina, for the public out there, make sure you know, was our very first Opus One employee, very first Opus One salesperson, and has been with us for a good number of years now. I'll just leave it at that.
The number, she looks like her age would be the number of years she's worked at Opus One.
Yeah, it's the drinking Opus One in moderation. That's the trick.
Well, guys, thank you very much. A real honor and privilege for you to spend time with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. You know, I'm inclined to just, my last comment for the day is, we learned so much, evidently, from Robert Mondavi. but Robert Mondavi really did two things in his life. He traveled around the States and around the world sharing his passion, as I told you earlier. But he also brought people to Napa. He invited people to come here so that they could sense it, so that they could experience it, and so we could create relationships. And we emulate that. We do the same thing. So anyone that's in the sound of our voices or seeing what we're saying, please come visit us, because there's nothing more satisfying than being able to share wine together in person. And coronavirus is such as it is. We're going to be opening up in the middle of July. It looks like. We'll let everybody know. But yeah, do come out and visit us, because it's we love to share, and we love to have people come see what we're doing. So thanks, Doug.
Pleasure. Michael, any final words?
Well, I think if you want to see how well Opus One ages, maybe, you know, a 6-pack, and open a bottle every 3 to 4 years, and you can watch it age. Anyone who ever has a question about how an older vintage is showing at the time, because wine is like us, you know, we have exceptional years, and some years we have a little bit, things don't go as well as we would like. Wine's the same thing, in the same way. So you can always give us a call or send an email or contact Gina, and we'll get an answer to you, because pretty good chance we've tasted every vintage, you know, within 3 years or so. So we can always tell you how the wines are showing. And I echo what David said. You know, we have a new partners room that will be opening in July, and we'd love you to come out and visit us and visit the Napa Valley. It really is a special place.
Well, thank you, and hope to see you in Napa or maybe in Chicago sometime soon.
Chicago's another great place.
Right.
Everybody,
Nice to you guys.
stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you
you guys.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.